Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Sharby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support and the recent content. Apologies for not having a live stream on Thursday. We had some technical difficulties. We will be having one on Saturday for when Team USA potentially wins gold. Before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so USA versus Serbia. What a game. What a game. Team USA, after being down by as much as 17 in the first half, ended up pulling it out 95-91. Steph Curry, what a performance. 36 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, 9 of 14 from 3, 12 of 19 from the field, 1 steal, plus minus of plus 20. It was just great overall, right? Obviously, he kind of got the team started off hot, scored a good chunk of his points in the first quarter, and kind of kept them, alive while Serbia was kind of getting out to a hot start, right? Just knocked down a ton of threes. Just, mainly a poor defensive showing from Team USA, in this game was kind of the main reason why they were down so much. I mean, they gave up 91 points. Serbia ended up in the fourth quarter, kind of getting shut down, right? They ended up only scoring 15. And again, 15, they held them to 15. They scored 32, to win by 4. That lets you know, right? It was, they had a tough comeback on their hands, right? I think they were down at the start of the fourth, I want to say by 11 or 14 points. So, this one, you kind of tip your cap to, the old heads for the most part, right? Because those guys kind of carried, for most of this game, right? Mainly, as you mentioned in the short, that we had the starters, right? You had Steph, as we already mentioned. LeBron with a triple-double, 16, 12, and 10, right? A lot of that in the second half, 2 of 4 from 3, 6 of 9 from the field. But Joel Embiid as well, right? And he was kind of key in this game, right? Because he obviously had been much maligned for most of his Team USA performances, but he was huge in this one, right? 19 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 block, right? 8 of 11 from the field, 2 of 3 from 3. So, I mean, he was huge, right? Because the bench, the second unit, didn't really do a whole lot, right? You look at the plus minuses, and not necessarily that plus minus is everything, but the second unit guys were just not very good in this game, not really all that effective, right? So it ended up coming down to the starters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you look over, I guess, Kevin Durant in the fourth quarter, obviously, had some big moments as well. But you look over at Serbia, right? Just looking around, right? You had Bogdanovic, right, of the Hawks, leading the team in scoring. He had 20 points, 8 of 18 from the field, 3 of 10 from 3, right? Just kind of just talking, trash, like every possession he was scoring earlier in the game. Perchusev with 9 and 5, right? Micic with 8 off the bench. Jokic with 17 points, 5 rebounds, only 5 rebounds, 11 assists. And he was 7 of 17 from the field, 7 of 11, 0 of 6 from 3. It just, seemingly continuing a trend where it just feels like he cannot, buy a basket from the outside, where it just feels like since that second round of the playoffs against Minnesota, he just has not been able to hit anything. I know some people have mentioned he's, had a wrist issue, I think, in the season at one point, so maybe that's still bugging him. I don't know. Avramovic, right, 15 off the bench. No, he started. He had 15 points, 4 of 6 from 3. Just some crazy hot 3-point shooting percentages. It all, eventually even out in the fourth because, again, the defense was bad. They kept collapsing, or they kept doubling Jokic, kept trying to, force him to make a play. He would kick out to shooters, and they made them pay every time. Lots of gambling for steals, lots of poor possessions, mainly defensively because, Team USA didn't have as many problems scoring. They did have some crazy turnovers. And a few weird possessions. There was one that I was just left baffled by where Team USA got a stop. I think it was Holiday got a steal. They went out on the break, and Edwards had a breakaway dunk. They ended up not giving it to him, and they kicked it back out to Steph for a 3, and it didn't go in, and it was just very mind-boggling. Just
that one got me out of my seat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was just very bizarre. Didn't really understand it. But, in the end, the Avengers came to play in the fourth quarter, right? They had to take out, Thanos, right? Dr. Doom, Kang, whoever you want to put out there. And, they ended up, putting an end to it. So just kind of great performance by those guys. And we talked about it, right, with a guy like Steph, because I know he hadn't been playing well, or at least hadn't been shooting well. And we talked about it where there's going to be a game where at, some point, because we talked about it, even when he doesn't hit shots, he's still, a guy that you have to worry about. And there's going to be a game at some point where he's going to go off. And it was in this game, right? 36 points. That's the most he's had in an Olympic game. Obviously, this is his first Olympics, but still, and even Embiid, right? You could kind of tell, right, over the course of these games, he looks like he's in more, good shape, right? He looks like he's in better and better shape, able to move around and run around. You wonder where some of that was in the previous games, but it didn't matter, right? And now that you have a much better version of Embiid, well, now you can see why he's going to be out there. There's still some issues, with some of the defensive possessions, right? Because, again, he's not quite as mobile or as, good in a switching defensive scheme as like a Bam or an AD. But, again, this was kind of a make-up payback, type game, considering, he wasn't good in some of the other games. And he was good against Puerto Rico, Brazil.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, you tip your cap to those guys because, all the, veteran guys were, very pivotal to winning this game. They don't win without those guys. And again, another DNP for both Jason Tatum and Tyrese Halliburton as well.
Yeah, I'm actually going to start with that. I think Tatum should have played in this game. I know he DNP'd in the other Serbian game. I get it. But at the same time, I don't, because I think what they lacked for the majority of this game up until the fourth quarter was defense and rebounding. And I think throughout the times that we've seen Tatum out on the court, he's literally only pretty much done that, defend and rebound. And I feel like, maybe inserting him in there could have, stopped the bleeding a little bit, considering a lot of the guys off the bench were not good offensively or defensively, if you want me to be honest. Like, I wasn't very impressed with AD, Bam, even Edwards. Like, I thought Edwards was horrible. Yeah, I thought Edwards was a way too sporadic, out of control, a little bit too much for my liking. Even D White, nobody really looked like they were locked in on the bench except for Katie. And even he, like, the majority of his, minutes, like, early on, I was like, they look like they partied way too much or something. Yeah. Something looked way off.
He was much better later in the game.
Yeah, he closed. It was bad. Like, and I the craziest possession to me, I know that it had nothing to do with AD, but when freaking Jokic pushed AD into KD for when KD was shooting a three, I was like, all right, what is this? The bad news bears. But like, as the game kind of went on, you could kind of see they were fighting. This was one where I think, if you're watching this and you're a fan of Team USA, you were on the edge of your seat because you didn't know if this was it. Was it over? But at the same time, you kind of, in the back of your head, you're like, there's no way we lose. We have a KD, we have Curry, we have LeBron. And that's kind of what happened, going into the fourth quarter. These guys, they turned on that switch that they all have, that we've kind of seen them have throughout their entire careers. And like you talked about, the Curry game was amazing. Like, it was a masterclass, but I think you really do have to highlight Joel Embiid because he went at Jokic and attacked him relentlessly. And even was versatile, from the 3-point line, taking guys off the dribble, dunking and stuff like that. And obviously getting to the line as well. I think, overall, you love what you see from Joel Embiid. LeBron James, obviously, we know what he can do. I thought Book was interesting. I thought his defense was very good. The offense was okay, but he hit his shots when he needed to, spot up, which is kind of the role that he kind of facilitated. But him, being really good on defense and getting some interesting stops, I think that was intriguing as well. Obviously, Katie coming in and hitting some clutch shots as well was awesome. But Serbia's hitting some shots where it was like kind of out of left field. I couldn't. Three. Yeah, I didn't believe it. Like, and it wasn't even Jokic really. It was the other guys like Bogdanovic, Avramovic, whatever his name is. So like all those guys, like, they were balling out of their mind. Like, they were hitting some crazy shots. Even the Micic guy. And like, the funny thing is with Micic, like, he cooled off, I think, the quickest out of all of them. Like, you could kind of tell the air ball. The air balls kind of started to pile up for him. But, you do have to tip your hat to the Serbian team because I think they came out there, with a clear message that they were not going to go down without a fight. And, Jokic is the guy for that team, obviously. And you could kind of see what they were doing offensively and even defensively, because we knew that they were a strong offensive team. But even defensively, I think they kind of bothered the U.S., got them out of their comfort zone. Exactly. And, Wade, I think, made a good comment about, the way that they were kind of shrinking the floor. But at the end of the day, U.S. really got hot from 3-point line as well. 50% from the 3-point line is very good, very efficient as a team. So, everybody kind of closed really well, and that's all that matters. But throughout those, first 3 quarters and even the majority of the fourth, I was like, oh my gosh, it can't be over, right? Not like this.
Funny enough, I actually thought that they were going to come back. Even when they were down by 17, it just like you said, it was just like you're just kind of thinking like, there's no way it's going to end like this, right? Like the team that you blew out the last 2 times, and like to be fair, like in theory, like we're not even in theory, actually in practice, it is difficult to beat a team 3 times by big margins. That's just very difficult to do, just because even if you're playing a bad team 3 times in a row, like in the NBA, it's just very difficult to do, just because there's some randomness to the game, right? Especially with the 3-point shot, where Serbia, as we mentioned, couldn't miss for a good chunk of the game. Then in the fourth quarter, as you mentioned, everything got tight, and it quickly kind of went the other team's way. So Team USA's way. So that's kind of the big thing, and that's where we talked about where eventually the talent is going to win out. And it was great again to see some of the guys that, like I said, had been maligned for some of their poor performances, especially show up in a must-win game. Because obviously you lose this game, and then you have to settle for possibly bronze or nothing at all, which would have been, an embarrassment, right?
Yeah.
So now they get to stay alive, and now worst they can do is silver. But now you got to play against France, right? Which is, funny because we thought, that Germany was going to beat France. And France ended up winning 73-69. Germany went up. They finished the end of the first, going up by as much as 7. And then, eventually France made a comeback, right? They had a great second and third quarter. And then, eventually Germany tried to make a comeback, but it just wasn't enough. And France was funny because they looked bad, in some of these other games, even in the games they were winning. They just didn't really look that great. But, they were, much better in this game, right? And again, even a guy like a Wemby, he didn't have the best game. He shot 4 for 17, right? He did have 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 blocks. So, as we've talked about him before, he did other things. But, it's just, I don't know. It just felt like at times that he was just kind of like, you could tell maybe he looked a little bit uncomfortable. But regardless, you still had plenty of other guys to get the job done, right? Former NBA player, former, I believe, Celtics legend, Gorshan Yabusele, right? He had 17 points, 7 rebounds. What is it? Isaiah Cordinier?
Yeah, it's literally, it's pronounced like Fournier's name, but Cordinier.
Yeah, Cordinier. Yeah, he had 16 points, 2 of 5 from 3, right? Batum, he did his thing as well. And again, like we mentioned before, right? Shout out to Germany, right? Because, again, they got, they did as well as they could. We thought they were going to beat France, but, France ended up playing better, in this game, and they made adjustments, right? Because, again, you didn't really see Gobert, right? He didn't really play at all. It was basically the other guys. And you look at Germany, right? Shooter had 18 points, but he shot 6 for 18. Right, so they shot 40% from the field, 29% from 3. So, very good defensive performance by France. And obviously, again, a must-win game because you lose this game, you don't get anything, right? Or I guess you might be able to get bronze, but regardless, it wouldn't have been. It's just rough. So, because again, Canada already went out, and that team, definitely was a disappointment. Probably the most disappointing team of this bunch. For sure. Yeah. So, now France gets to stay alive. See if they can beat Team USA. But, again, like, you give credit to France because, like, they definitely had the tougher path, compared to Team USA. Like, and we expected Team USA to go through it regardless. But, again, when you don't have to play Canada, you don't have to play France, or I guess now you do, but, like, you don't have to play Canada, you don't have to play Germany or France on the way to the gold medal.
Yeah.
You face, one of those teams right at the end. So that's impressive because, again, it didn't feel like they had it in them because it seemed like they hadn't played well for most of the tournament. But, they're here.
Yeah, France was in like that death group where like a ton of countries like we're going to get knocked out. But for them to be the last one standing is awesome. And I believe, it's the first time since 1996 that the host team, or like the the host country's team will be able to actually compete for a medal in basketball, which is pretty cool. So shout out to France, very historic. And like you talked about, they win their games on the defensive end. With Wemby, it's kind of the same concern that we had about him kind of coming into the league was don't fall in love with the three ball. You're, 7'4", 7'5", whatever you want to call yourself.
1 for 8.
Just go to the basket, bro. But I get it. It's tough when they're being physical and, double teaming you. It's easier said than done. But at the end of the day, he's still going to be a great, player. And you already know our hot take or, our take about, what he's going to potentially look like next season. But yeah, his defensive impact is unmatched. I feel like, he completely overshadowed Gobert. Gobert pretty much hasn't played in the past couple of games due to the fact that Wemby's been so good on the defensive end. And obviously, Gobert's dealing with the finger stuff. But at the end of the day, great defensive showing from France. And, we'll see. I think this is going to be a very entertaining game. I don't think it's going to be nearly as entertaining as what we just saw. I don't think it's going to get any better than that. So I am curious how it ends up, shaping out to be. But France has got to find something on offense, I feel like, if they want to stand a chance.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing is like that's gonna be interesting is that defensive factor because Team USA they haven't gone against like a Wemby type guy in the paint, and again like you mentioned he's not the biggest guy. He's obviously very tall and very long, right? But he's still a skinny guy, right? So he's the type of guy like you mentioned that could against some physical players, bigger physical guys, it might be a problem, right? Because he's probably gonna have to be the guy that probably has to stick with Embiid, right? Because you look at the rest of the group, and those guys wouldn't be big enough, right? Like Yabusele is a big guy, but he's not that tall,
right? Gobert probably won't play a whole bunch, I don't think.
Right? Yeah, maybe against second units, but who knows?
Maybe 10 minutes max, because Wemby played 32.
Yeah,
these guys are playing like playoff minutes,
almost the whole game.
Yeah, it's playoff minutes, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. So. Then Batum probably is on one of the wings, right? Or I guess maybe he guards I don't know, Booker or, whomever is out there, right? And then Ntilikina is probably the Steph guy.
Yep.
I mean, it's going to be a team effort anyways, but, that's going to be interesting to see, the Wemby factor against Team USA. But as we've talked about before, like Team USA, there's a talent, level advantage that I just think is going to be tough for these teams to overcome. But Serbia almost did it. So, and that's where, again, the effort on both ends of the floor does mean something. Because, again, Team USA on the defensive end of the floor in the first half just wasn't good enough, right? And, again, that kind of goes to show that, you can't necessarily just lollygag around and just kind of waltz your way, to these wins. Obviously, you can against some of the, lower-ranked teams. But against these teams, you're going to have to actually try on both ends of the floor. But, offensively, I feel like Team USA might be able to, kind of relax a little bit more compared to what, Serbia, compared to Serbia in this game. But at the same time, you just never know, right? Because you leave guys open, you daring guys to shoot, and sometimes they can get hot. But, there's not like Wemby's a different type of offensive guy than Jokic, right? Where he's not usually, playing in the high or the low post and kind of, acting as like a point guard or point big man, kicking it out. That's not really how he plays. So it's a different type of look. So you won't probably have to do the same thing in terms of like double teaming and, forcing him to kick out and collapse and whatnot. So it'll look different, but I still expect Team USA to win.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what a ride. I mean, again, it's kind of funny because, I feel like for a lot of people, right, even though Team USA looks like they're going to win gold, I feel like some people might be, I don't know, a little bit disappointed in how it's looked, just from the perspective of I think, it seems like some people are like, this is not the dream team because they're not blowing teams out by 40, but
it's a dumb argument in my opinion.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's it doesn't matter if you win by 1 or 100, you're still winning, but
and the world got better. The world got better at basketball. Right. That would be my counter argument to that
and that's
point.
My counter too, is that again, there were no Jokic's, that on some of these other teams, and not that those guys weren't good, right? That's not the case at all.
Right.
It's just these guys, it's just different, right? And I don't know how to describe it, but also just in general, again, as we've talked about, when you're putting this group of guys together, and a lot of these guys have not played alongside one another other than one game out of the season, I guess the All-Star game, and that's only some of them.
Right.
It takes a little bit of time, but either way, you get gold and it doesn't matter, right? 4 years from now, all those guys, at whether or not it's at the next Olympics, because some of them won't be back, but like that they could just be at somebody's house and like just being like, hey, remember that time we could have lost to Serbia, but we didn't, and we still got gold.
They got it done, bro. Well,
Yeah,
they're on
like
their way to getting it done.
yeah, like now it's kind of a footnote at this
Mm-hmm.
point. But again, shout out to Serbia for giving us. They've given us like every game they've been in for the most part has been just kind of like an interesting barn burner fest. I mean, they had the blowouts in the earlier games, but these last few games like really could have gone either way.
Yeah,
I mean, they were in a dogfight against South Sudan. They were in a dogfight against Australia where they were getting destroyed right early in the game. They were down by as much as 24.
Yeah.
And then obviously they had this game where I'm sure it stings because it looked like to maybe some people that they were going to win and pull off the upset, but instead they ended up, losing all the edge in the fourth quarter.
Yeah. I'm curious. I'm curious, like, because I think there's a couple of interesting takeaways that I feel like you could have with Serbia, because I know some people have been kind of trying to make the point that Jokic has been playing pretty good defense. What do you think of that? I think he's been playing better defense than he has on the Nuggets, from what I've seen, but it's not elite by any means. Because I mean, you look at what Embiid was able to do in this game, like he attacked him on purpose. That's why he went off.
Yeah, and I think also like when you look at that team, even though obviously they've played together for a while, so they know how to communicate and do whatever they need to do as a team, it's still the personnel just isn't the same, right? Like you don't have an Aaron Gordon, athleticism or size. I mean, I guess some guys size-wise, but not like strength or, athleticism-wise. It's just not the same, right? And you're also not playing against the same, normal teams, right? Because, like there's no NBA team that has Team USA level talent up and down the roster. Those guys can, they'll have one or two guys on, some of those teams, but not 10.
Yeah.
But either way, so I think that's part of it, right? Where it's like, and also like that's not his strength. Like he's not really considered. I know he had like the block on LeBron or whatever, but like, his strength isn't really as a rim protector. He's more of like a positional defender where he can kind of, get in to guys and be physical and put his hands up and just be big. But, against certain types of guys that have a little bit of, shiftiness to them, it's a little bit difficult, right? Like you saw, like, say, when the Nuggets and the Wolves played, like, how easy it was for Edwards, to kind of find his way to the rim. But then against Dallas, right, it was a lot more difficult for him to do that. So, it comes down to, like, a combination of personnel, plus also just that other person's, like, individual level defense. Because, I mean, it's like, I don't know what you can really do against that group, because it's just at a certain point you're not going to be able to hold them for, forever.
Right.
But yeah, but I agree where it's like it's okay, but it needs to be really good because you don't have the same level of personnel, right? Like he's a guy where he could probably at times be better defensively than he normally is, but it would also require more effort. And for stretches, it was easier to do that when as you mentioned, right, the other guys in the first half, right, for the most part, were the guys that were the beneficiaries of him kicking out the shots. He wasn't really scoring like, most of his baskets early in the game.
Nope.
It was mostly passing and rebounding. Well, I mean, he didn't have a lot of rebounds, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
he's being their point guard.
Right, yeah. It's a lot easier, like, whereas once those other shots started, not falling, and then it's like, all right, now we kind of need you to do a little bit more scoring-wise. Well, then the defense part becomes a lot more difficult because then you have to do both, and that's just very difficult to do.
Yeah.
As a big with that type of personnel. So
not
great, but is it the reason they lost? Not necessarily, but yeah, I'm kind of on point with you.
Yeah.
And now, we'll see what happens. Yeah. Now we'll see what happens. With Team USA. Again, we both expect them to win gold. We'll see how that game goes. But now we get into more offseason talk, and this time around it's the Atlanta Hawks, right?
Great.
So how do we look at it, the offseason from this perspective? It's just it's a lot of interesting stuff, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just because that always sounds kind of bad, like whenever you use the words like interesting or intriguing, because they don't really sound that definitive. They sound kind of like, oh, you're kind of just covering over stuff. But you look at the Hawks last season, they were not very good, right? They were pretty bad. We thought they'd be much better, right? We didn't expect them to be a contender or anything, but the year before they were a 500 team, right? 41-41. Last season they were worse, 36-46, 10 games below 500. They were in the play-in just because the bottom of the East stinks, and they were a stinky team, right? So, you look around the roster, and they made some changes, right? Obviously, because we talked about it where they were probably going to have to decide between Trae Young or DeJounte Murray. And they ended up keeping Trae Young, and he is the better player, right? And I think we were kind of leaning towards maybe maybe he stays and they just revisit the DeJounte stuff in the offseason. But you just never know. You never really know with this group because this team is kind of unpredictable in terms of like how they make deals with a lot of these type of offers and teams and players because they some of these moves just come out of nowhere, right? Like I never expected them to trade for DeJounte Murray in the first place, and as we mentioned before, that deal ended up not really working out, right? Obviously he's a talented guy, but him and Trae Young just didn't fit together, right? The backcourt wasn't as good defensively as you would have liked. The team defensively was still bad, and it was time to move on, right? They got very fortunate, I guess, right? That their lottery luck ended up turning out into the number one pick. Obviously, not the highest ceiling draft in the world, but it is the number one pick. We were curious what they were going to do with it, and they took Zachary Risacher, right? Number one overall, 19-year-old wing from France, right? We talked about it, right? That's a pick that is fine, makes sense for them from a personnel perspective, right? Because you look at their other forward options, right? You got DeAndre Hunter, right? Who's okay, right? But not the best, right? Bogdan Bogdanovic, who is kind of in between, right? Like a 2 and a 3. I guess Jalen Johnson, who plays 4 for them mostly. And then after that, not a whole lot else, right? So it made sense to do that. You do kind of wonder what Atlanta looks to do next season as a team, but it's an interesting mix of players, right? Because you still have some older guys like a Clint Capella, who we don't know if they're going to move. Maybe they are. They probably should. So you can open up some minutes for Onyeka Okongwu, so you don't have to, kind of go back and forth between who starts and who finishes. Obviously, in terms of that DeJounte Murray trade, you got back Larry Nance Jr., and you got Dyson Daniels, and they also got back the pick from the Lakers, right? That was from that New Orleans had, right, in that AD deal, right?
Yeah,
And
unprotected.
and if you didn't know, right, that pick, the Pelicans had the option to either take it now or defer it back to 2025, and they decided to defer it because next year's draft is supposed to be better. But now the Hawks have that pick, right? So, we'll see what happens with the Lakers this year, right? So they have more of an incentive to kind of hope that the Lakers don't do very well next year, right? So it makes a lot of sense for them, to not really deal Trae Young to the Lakers. Not that we ever expected it anyways, right? But either way, I don't know what the starting 5 is in terms of like who's the 5th guy, right? Because I'm assuming obviously like Trae Young, Risacher. I'm gonna assume Capella's still gonna start in Jalen Johnson, but who's the 5th guy? Because Bogdanovic has kind of been the 6th man, for a while. But does he step into there? Do they start Dyson Daniels? Do they start Kobe Buffkin, who hasn't really done a whole lot, at all at this point? So I'm not sure about that. I mean, this team I feel like is still probably, not going to be that great. I mean, you could make the argument that maybe they'll be better because you don't have DeJounte Murray, so maybe the roster makes a little more sense. But I still don't feel like they're going to be that good. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
when I don't know, and that's where it's kind of hard to give them a grade for the offseason, where it's like, okay, the Risacher pick is fine. DeJounte Murray trade, you didn't really get back anything players-wise for him. You got Dyson Daniels, which I guess is kind of cool. And you got Larry Nance Jr., another big, which I guess is kind of fine, I guess. And then the Laker pick, but who knows if that's going to even really be any good. So, I don't know. C plus, B minus. It was just an average team, kind of had an average offseason.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah, so it's like Risacher, if you like his ceiling, you could bump it up to a B minus. And I think he'll be fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know like how amazing he'll be. So I'm gonna probably leave it like at a C plus because I just think it's kind of a mediocre offseason. But I could see them being better. And like I said, I don't hate. There's nothing that they did that I hate. But there's not like a ton of stuff that I love other than I like the Risacher pick just from a fit perspective. But that's kind of it, unless there's something I'm just leaving out.
Yeah, I mean, I think they did a couple of good things.
Okay.
Adding the size and defense.
Yeah.
I think,
They also traded AJ Griffin.
yeah,
Not to mention that.
yeah, like they did get rid of some kind of dead weight, I think, at some positions. And like I said, adding the size and defense is awesome. But yeah, I feel like biting the bullet on the DeJounte Murray thing has to knock them down a couple notches. Like, and I'm not saying like, yeah, you shouldn't have moved him. We were advocates for that band needed to be broken up. And they did that, which is a good thing. It's just, it was a lose-lose. Yeah, too little, too late. What you got in return was very underwhelming, in my opinion. In terms of getting back Larry Nance Jr., a potential lottery pick, and Dyson Daniels. Like, I think I like Dyson Daniels the most because he's a young guy with a ton of defensive upside.
Yes.
But the problem is no jump shot at the moment. But, that's kind of the trend that we've seen, with young guys in the past couple of years in the NBA. Then you bring in Risa Share. Cool. But is he going to be a star? Who knows? I mean, I like the guy's game. Like, I think he's going to be a solid two-way sharpshooter. But the beauty of his situation, which I think is better for him more so than the Hawks, is he's not the main guy. He's not a franchise player at the moment. Like, you look at him and you look at the roster that's constructed. You already talked about some of the guys on the roster, but, the main guy is Trae Young. He's their franchise player at the moment. So, a lot of eyes are going to be on him. And I know, I think the expectation for Risa Share, I think he's going to look good. But I think Trae Young is going to make him look a lot better in that regard. We've seen how he's able to kind of make certain guys look very freaking good. Like John Collins looked very good, in his prime when it was, him and Trae Young with that duo. So I think there's a possibility for this team to be okay. But I definitely wouldn't say they're going to be crazy or anything like that. But like I said, the diminishing returns, I think, on the moves that they made were kind of the thing that kind of bogs them down. You let Sadiq Bey also walk as well, which is, I know, the guy is going to be recovering off of the ACL injury, but to not be able to get anything back from him is unfortunate. And then I think they took back Cody Zeller via sign and trade or something like that. So then that was the thing that prevented them from making Sadiq Bey like a restricted free agent. So, would you rather have that, than Sadiq Bey? I don't know, but I get it. Like, Sadiq Bey was going to be hurt. So I do understand the thought process a little bit. But for me, I'm going to bump it down to like a C-. Like, it would have been a B- if the return was better for DeJounte Murray, and I feel like they would have got something that would have instantly helped them out. Yeah. And, maybe replace what you lost in him, maybe elsewhere. All right, cool. That would have been fine. But, for them to kind of just get back mid is rough. And that's kind of what they've been. They've been very mediocre, very mid. Going into this next season, I don't have a ton of expectations for them. Like I said, the main guy that I kind of have my eyes on is Trae Young, because I will stand on it. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the league at the moment. The guy, what he can do with the ball is very special. We already know he gets attacked on the defensive end. He'll never have defense. But offensively, if he's surrounded with the right guys, I think, that team can be something special. I think any team with Trae Young could be special. But, the Hawks have not done a very good job, I think, managing his career thus far. So C- for me. But the mainstay for why it's not like, a D+ or an F is because they made some decent upgrades to, their weaknesses from last year. So they did something.
Yeah. I mean, and again, like, that's kind of where I'm at. Like, where it's like C+, I think it's like not the worst offseason, but not the best. And like you said, mainly just because it just felt like the return was low for, what they did. Now, to be fair, it's not like they gave up, everything to get DeJounte Murray in the first place, but you did give up picks. And we know they're probably not going to be that great, for a little bit, right? Because it doesn't feel like this team's ceiling is it's just not that high.
Right.
Which is unfortunate because, like you said, you have a guy in Trae Young who's, like an all-star, all-NBA type guy, right? But, the rest of the roster just feels kind of bland. And it's like, does Dyson Daniels start, you think, next to Trae Young?
That's going to be intriguing.
Because I still don't know who the other starting guard is. Because I feel like Bogdanovich is still going to be a 6-man guy.
Yeah, I mean, it could be possible. I
Mm,
I think Dyson Daniels should start, if you want me to be honest. I think, his defensive upside, and I think they should be going for size and defense. That should be what you surround Trae Young with. And
right.
I think we know that Risa Share can also kind of develop into that. And like one more
Mhm.
point on, the Hawks as an overall offseason, I feel like their grade is kind of contingent on two things. Number one, if that 2025 pick turns into a lottery pick, I think that
Right.
boosts their grade as well. And if Risa Share turns out to be Himothy, that guy from this freaking draft class, then yeah, their grade is boosted as well. But the problem
Right.
is, if it's not a lottery pick and he's a bust, yeah, that offseason is going to go down as a bad one.
Right. And as the number one pick, as even though, like you said, you mentioned, that Trae Young is the guy on that team, but he also is the number one pick. So I feel like it's going to be tough for him to be just mediocre or okay, and
Right.
not have some people be like, well, hey, this guy was the number one pick. What's going on here?
Right.
Obviously, Atlanta doesn't really have a spotlight under them anymore because they just haven't really been that good. But it will be something to think about.
Do,
So,
do you think he has to be better than Jalen Johnson or around that?
mm, no, I don't think so because I feel like Jalen Johnson, he's been, this is going to be what, year 4, right?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah. Coming into this season, it'll be, yeah, number 4.
Yeah, so I feel like he's going to be, and he's been, obviously very good for them anyways. So I feel like, I mean, as long as he's like just like a okay 3-and-D wing, I mean, that's fine, right? Because Jalen Johnson averaged 16, 9, and 4, 51 from the field, 35 from 3. So I don't think he has to do that. But could he give you like, I don't know, 12, 5, and something like that?
Okay.
I
That's
mean,
interesting. I feel like that's a little low for a number 1, though.
it is. It is. It is. I'm just like looking at it from the perspective of, I guess, like scoring wise. I just don't know if I expect him to be like one of the primary offensive
Right,
options. But
right.
then I guess if you look around after Trae Young, who is the next offensive option?
Jalen Johnson.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's the thing. So, like, the third guy, quote unquote, offensively, I mean, is probably, I'm going to assume DeAndre Hunter, just like pecking order wise.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, like I mean that and that's what I'm thinking. Like I'm like it's just stats wise, I don't expect him to be like a typical number one pick where they're gonna average like 20 a game and like 4 rebounds and however many assists. I just don't expect it because, like you said, he's not really the guy on this team, which is very rare for a number one pick. That's not the norm. But this was that type of draft where just people didn't really consider the star power stuff there. They just didn't think that was an element. Whereas, like say, like next year, let's say Cooper Flag or Ace Bailey goes number one overall, right? Like
Which they will.
you're expecting them to put up better stats because
Heck yeah.
they're expected to be very high level players. So
Sure, I get it. And there's so many questions with this team. Like
exactly.
Kobe Buffkin is another question. I know people are probably like,
Right.
"Who the heck is that?" Well, yeah, that's the problem. Like,
Right.
and it's not like he's a bad player. Very, raw
Right.
in college, but
Yeah.
where does he fit into this rotation, if
Yeah.
at all?
I don't know. Reportedly, I think that was the guy, if I'm not mistaken, that the Lakers were maybe gonna draft, but then he went before. But then it's like I don't know what he is. So
The Michigan tape is good. I'll tell you that.
Right.
But
okay.
the NBA tape is non-existent. I don't know.
He just hasn't played, right?
Yeah.
So I mean,
What else did the Hawks do? They added Dominic Barlow. Probably won't play a lot. David Roddy.
Yeah, that was the Suns deal that allowed them to open up the roster spot to get Tyus Jones. But I mean, like David Roddy, I mean I'm not
like
gonna say he's bad, but like
he's not it. But like overall, I don't have high expectations for this team. I don't think anybody in the NBA really should. I think you should kind of be monitoring these players at an individual rate. If you want me to be honest, like monitor Jalen Johnson's growth. Look at Risa Share. Look at Trae Young. Figure out what you need to do for next season so you can improve a little bit. Because
Kobe Buffkin in his rookie season in 17 games, 5 points a game, 1.9 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 37 from the field, 22.5 from 3.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that.
I don't really know what he is.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he's young though. He's only 20.
Yeah. The other thing I think to kind of look for from the Hawks is potentially like they could be another one of those teams that maybe maybe deadline could be a team that moves some guys, right? That's another possibility, right?
Okay.
Like again, maybe a guy like a Clint Capella, maybe a Bogdanovich, maybe even like a Larry Nance Jr. or one of these other guys on the roster. I mean, maybe even like DeAndre Hunter. Probably not, but I mean, I'm just there are guys on this roster that I wouldn't necessarily say are safe. Like there are very
Yeah.
few quote unquote untouchables on this team. Atlanta seems to have communicated like we're not trying to move Trae Young. We're not trying to move Jalen Johnson. Obviously you're not moving Reese Share because you just drafted him number 1 overall. So I guess pretty much everyone else is kind of fair game.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you can go into this coming season with that mindset. You look at
Okay.
the personnel. I don't have a problem with that. I would actually prefer them to kind of commit to being bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But problem is I don't think they have a couple other picks. So
Yeah. So yeah. So it just I don't know. It's just kind of a weird situation with
it's a
them.
hard one to
But
gauge. I agree.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like and that's the tough part is just because like and again like with the way that they operate, that's the other part where because there are some teams where you kind of know the type of things that they're going to do, but they're just so unpredictable. Or I guess maybe the predictable part is it seems like they always wait too late to move
Yes,
guys.
bro.
Like John
Yes.
Collins, when his value was high, they never moved him,
Nope.
and then by the time they moved him, what did they get back? Nothing, literally
Absolutely
nothing. It was like
nothing.
what Rudy
Rudy
Gay, I think that was
Gay
it.
at the end of
Yeah,
his
Rudy.
career, bro. Come on now.
Yeah, exactly. So their future picks, yeah, they don't have their first this year. So,
Yeah, GG.
well, I guess let's see. It looks like it's the Kings. It
Okay.
was so. Let's see. No, they have the Lakers pick,
Mm-hmm.
obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Then they have the Kings protected 1 through 12. I think that's from the Kevin Herter trade.
Mm.
So they don't have their own.
Yeah,
And
that's what I
then
thought.
yeah, and then next year, no first at all. And then 2027. Atlanta will receive the least favorable of New Orleans 2027 first and Milwaukee's 2027 first. So it's like a pick swap or
So
whatever.
there's basically no point in them being bad. They need to kind of be okay.
Which
It's not going to be
I
possible.
do you know what
Great.
their over under is on, ESPN Bet?
Let's find out.
Well, I was going to ask you to guess.
Oh, I have no clue. Let's see. Over under. Let's actually think about this. It's
Well, I
Atlanta.
mean, I'm looking at it, so
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking for myself. I'm Hawks.
yeah.
Is it like 30? Is it 30?
Pretty close.
What was it?
35.5.
Okay.
So,
Under.
so in other
That's
words,
an easy under.
so- yeah. So in other words, this team's going to be bad because they were 36 and 46 last season. And as we've talked about with the Eastern Conference, it's a little bit different because there are Eastern Conference teams that did get better, but there are also Eastern Conference teams that got worse. But I don't know if the Hawks necessarily got better, right? Because, like we know Brooklyn is going to be really stinky. We know they're going to be horrible. But then like you look around at the rest of the Atlantic Division, which we already talked about, like Celtics will be good, Knicks will be good, Sixers will be good, Raptors probably not good, but probably on par with Atlanta if I had to guess. Then if you look at Central Division, Bulls will be. I'm not even going to touch that one, but they're going to be.
We'll
bad.
get there.
Yeah, Cavs. Again, we'll get into all these teams, but like Cavs will be fine, Bucks will be fine, Pacers will be fine, Pistons will be bad, and then in the Southeast, right? Hawks, Hornets, Heat, okay, and then Magic and Wizards. So it's like they're going to be in that lower tier of the Eastern Conference more than likely, right? Because it's just, none of the teams that made the playoffs last year, I feel like the Hawks will be better than, right? So that's already 8 teams, right? Because you're talking about Boston, Cleveland, New York, right? Milwaukee, Indiana, Philly, and I guess Miami, right? So they're not going to be better than any of those teams. So at best, they'll be 9-10 probably, right? At best.
Yeah. I think their ceiling is probably around what they did last year, 36 games.
Yeah.
But I feel like their floor is between 25 and 30. If you want me to be honest,
Right.
I don't see them going. I don't see them going like to Charlotte territory or Wizards territory, like 15 and 21. No,
Right.
I think like 25 to 30 is a solid estimate for them.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, that and then the Hawks could be weird because they could have like some like just weird offensive games that like boost them to like I don't know 38 or something like that.
Right.
But I feel like somewhere in the 30s is about where I would expect them to be. So like over under is a little bit weird because like I could see them getting like 36, 37 or something
Sure.
like that. That could be one where it could be a slight over. But then it's like obviously if they clear house and they move some of those other guys, then like it's a straight,
Yeah.
it's a straight under.
I think it's 25-30. That's going to be my final guesstimate.
Yeah, but it's just rough because, like you said, they're gonna be bad, but they have no incentive to be bad. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
rough part where it's like I just kind of wonder then if that's the case, are they even gonna make those deals? Because if they don't get anything back, like in terms of future assets, then I don't know. But how many of those guys are teams giving away future assets for? Like, are you giving up multiple firsts for like Clint Capella or like multiple firsts for DeAndre Hunter? Like,
No,
probably not.
no.
Like, yeah, like,
Maybe
yeah, like
one for
yeah,
Clint,
maybe one,
but
but
none for DeAndre Hunter. I'm very low
right,
on his stock right now. That's a stock. That's a guy's stock that I wish I could sell.
right, yeah. So it's just like I don't know. So there's so like I don't know. It's just such a tough team to look at, but I don't know. I feel like they're still gonna suck
Yeah.
at the end of the day. Like I just don't really see this team being good. Because I don't know. I just don't feel like they have like a lot of like upper end talent other than Trey Young. I think that's kind of the main issue.
Yeah.
Like I guess Jalen Johnson as well, but after that, like it's a big drop off. Who's the third best player on this team?
I mean, I don't know. I want to say Reese Share, but at the same time, he's very unproven. So,
Right.
um,
So it's like, yeah. So who is it? Is it DeAndre Hunter? Is it Bogdanovich? Like,
probably
is it
Bogdanovich, bro.
yeah? Is it Capel? Like, I don't. Yeah, like that's the problem. Like, and if those guys are, and if those guys are your third best players, or in this case, we don't even know who it is, and that's your crop of third best players. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so now moving on to some other stuff. We had some a big thing happen over the week, right, where you had Laurie Markkinen, right, where we talked about it on our live stream, but it sounds like he's going to, or he's already has, right, signed his max deal extension, right. We've talked about this where both of us felt that he was probably not going to get moved. We weren't quite. It felt weird, early in the offseason. Not when they was first reported that he could get moved, but you just didn't know what Utah was going to do. But after a while, it felt like they weren't really going to move him, and especially once you kept hearing the back and forths about like, oh, this team wants this, but Utah wants this, and once you keep hearing that, probably not going to happen. But he ended up signing 5-year, $238 million deal, right? A renegotiation and an extension, right? So they're going to add money onto this year, right, where they're going to basically use the remainder of the remaining cap space to boost up his contract this year. So he's going to make 42 million. And right, because he had 1 year, 18 left on that deal, but now he'll be making 42. Basically going to be making 40, 50 million a year, which is a lot, right? But, for Utah, obviously now the big thing is that by giving him this extension, especially since it was after August 6th, right, then that takes him out of the trade market. So now he cannot be traded this season. So the earliest he could be moved is next summer, right? So obviously any team that was in on him, right, which we'll talk about in a moment, right, like Golden State, San Antonio, Sacramento, and some of those teams pivoted anyways, right? You can't go after him now, right? And for Utah, at least for next season, right now he's going to be part of your group. And we'll see what they can do in terms of like building around him, right? Because obviously, like him being your best player probably isn't ideal. But if Utah still manages to be bad and manages to get like a top 5 pick, then again, I'm not saying they're going to be a championship team, but then obviously that's a better spot, right? Because then if you can draft another guy after him going into next summer, right, where all of a sudden that guy is kind of like your other number one possible piece of the future, right? Then it looks better. But
Right.
obviously for the Jazz, like as of right now, like the main winner in this is Laurie Markkinen because you get the money, right? You get the money right now. You have security at least for this season, and that's kind of the number one thing, right? So and now with Utah, now if they're gonna deal him later on, right? Now you're gonna have to be able to send out money that's a little bit closer. So, and we already kind of saw like some interesting offers, that mainly Golden State kind of had on the table. But what do you think about this?
I mean, I'm fine with it. I think this is a good
Right.
move for both sides, in perspective of Lori and obviously Utah. I think, you can have a building block for the future, I think, because I think the guy, he hasn't peaked yet. I think, there's a chance that he gets even better. And then obviously, if you want to move him down the line, that's also a possibility as well. It's not like, you're locked into him super duper long term. You can move him. And if he turns out to be a building block for the future alongside whoever they draft, and they've surrounded him with some young talent, so I don't think he's going to be their franchise guy by any means, but I think he's going to be that solid contributor who can get them to contention alongside whatever team they're building. Because if those young guys shape out, like, Keontae George, Taylor Hendricks, alongside like Collier, that's a young, solid core that I think, Lauri Markkanen could benefit from. So I don't think, Lauri Markkanen is that kind of player that pushes them into contention by himself. It's more so, yeah, we're going to be bad with you and you're here along for the ride. And we appreciate you. So here's a bunch of cash and we're gonna get this thing together, with you in the picture potentially. But if he wants out, he has a way out. So it's not like, it's like the be all end all. But for him to be here to stay is pretty cool because, considering, he floated around a lot. We talked about in the live stream, he floated around from Chicago to Cleveland, now to Utah. I think this is his home. I think it makes sense for him and his brand for sure. So, yeah, I think, you can. I'm all on board with this one. And, his numbers were pretty solid. So I think he's
Yeah.
worth the money.
Yeah, you look at, what he's done the last couple of seasons, right? For the Utah Jazz, right? Obviously, his first year in Utah, right? He was an all-star, right? He averaged basically 25 and a half a game, 8.5 rebounds, 2 assists, half a steal, half a block, 50 from the field, just under 50 from the field, and 39 from three. Then last season, numbers were a little bit down in 55 games, but still really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
23 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, just under steal, 48 from the field, just under 40 from three, right? So, and also 8 3-point attempts a game. So very high volume 3-point shooter for a 7-footer, but makes a high percentage of them and is still also a very efficient offensive player, right? Good athlete. There's a lot of things to like about his game. So it makes sense that other teams were after him. But like you said, I don't think, he's like a number one guy on a really good team. But if you're Utah, if you didn't like the offers that were available, then why would you do it, right? Like that, this is not like a guy that you're gonna try to sell really, really low on, right? You want to get, what you realistically can, obviously. And, now you kind of wonder, you know, what's the next move, right? Because obviously, like, since the marketing thing is over, does this open up the table for, say, maybe Utah to move some of those other veteran guys like a John Collins, like a Jordan Clarkson, or a Colin Sexton, and like you mentioned, kind of commit to the younger guys? Does this open the door for other teams, right? Now that the marketing thing is off, does this open the door for other teams to kind of start pivoting to other guys? And now the team that you kind of look at is Golden State, right? Because obviously that was the team that had the biggest ties to Lauri Markkanen, right? They missed out on Paul George, missed out on Lauri Markkanen, so reportedly they're going to engage, according to the Athletic, in smaller type of deals. But then also when you kind of read up about it, it doesn't really sound like that they were really willing to go all in, right? According to ESPN as well as according to the Athletic, right? They didn't really try that hard. They didn't really give their best offers, right? We had heard a lot about, like, Brandon Pajemski was off the table, and that's who the Jazz wanted, right? Maybe the Warriors didn't necessarily want to give up Kaminga, right? It sounded a lot like they were kind of offering like Moses Moody and picks, and it's like you're not getting Lauri Markkanen for that, right? Like if I'm Utah, I'm not doing that. And especially I think with Golden State, if I'm not mistaken, the most amount of first that I think they could actually trade was two,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then the rest would be pick swaps, and then, as has already been mentioned, second rounders. But Moses Moody kind of being the highlight of the package is just, I mean, he's not even a bad player. It's just, why would I do that if I'm Utah? Like, if I'm Utah, why wouldn't I want, at least one of, Pods or Kaminga? But I guess for Golden State, then you also kind of wonder, like, okay, well, how much do they actually really believe that they should actually, try to upgrade the roster? And I'm not saying that they're not going to, but, I can understand, obviously, like, if you're, when you're trying to get a guy like that, you don't want to give them your best offer right away. Obviously, you want to kind of start with, a lower type of deal and then work your way, to the middle or whatever. But, then I guess the other question is, if they got Lauri Markkanen, you know, how much better would they be? Some of that is dependent on what they would give up. But if you gave up, like say like a Kaminga and Pajemski and picks, right? Like I guess you'd be better, but would you be good enough? And maybe they just don't really want to go all in. Maybe they feel like if there's a good deal, we'll do it, but we're not necessarily like going to throw all of our chips at like Lauri Markkanen or Paul George. Because again, it sounds like that they wanted those guys, but it also sounded like they didn't do as much as they could, to realistically get them. And and they're in a tough spot because of the fact that the realistic ability for them to actually be a legit contender is just not super high. Like it's very clear that they need upgrades to talent, but then even if you do that, how much better actually are you, and is it worth it to do it? And it's tough because like you have stuff on the roster, so you definitely don't really want to put yourself in a position where we're just gonna kind of just be okay with being bad, and he's just gonna kind of ride off into the sunset. Like you would like to have like a good team, around him to give him a realistic shot. I just don't necessarily know how feasible it is at this point. And it has already been mentioned like they're also not really interested in Ingram or Levine either.
Yeah, I mean, from what I can gather about the Warriors, I think they're cooked. In terms of what they could do offseason wise, you're obviously banking and having a ton of belief in, Steph Curry, the guy who carried your dynasty for all those years and got you all those chips, which is the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, you do have to look at that roster with a microscope, and you can just tell. I don't think it's top 5 in the West. No. It doesn't make them a contender at all. And I think we were expecting a little bit more. They kind of had built up a little bit of this hype where, you're able to kind of let Clay go and do his thing. And then you're going to bring in another big name to kind of help, bolster up the offense and, just one last ride kind of thing. But that didn't really seem to happen. Like you said, they swung and missed on a lot of guys, and really it didn't even seem like they swung on Markkanen at all. Like that's kind of been the report. Like it's been like, jive stepping, a complete half step of a freaking offer. Because I mean, in what world would anybody take that unless they were really trying to get rid of Lauri? And I don't think that was the plan. I think they were fielding all. Yeah, and true. And it's like I feel like with the Lauri Markkanen, I feel like they were kind of fielding offers more so. It's not like they were trying to deliberately. Yeah, they were not trying deliberately to get rid of him. That was kind of my takeaway from the whole situation. But in regards to the Warriors, I don't think there's a lot they can do. I think their hands are completely tied. They made the moves that they did, which were okay. I think I'm more on the side where it's like they're confusing to me. I get what they did, but still not even remotely close enough for me to believe that they can even have a chance to come out of the West next season.
Yeah, like I guess the question is, what's more likely? Is it more likely that they win a playoff series, or is it more likely that they miss the playoffs? And I feel like
the latter.
I think the latter one.
Yep.
I think the latter one is probably more likely.
Yeah, I mean,
which is rough.
Yeah, I mean, look at what happened last season, and I don't think they got better. I don't think it's like, crazy.
You're kind of banking on, I think, the younger guys taking some type of leap, right? Especially Kuminga, since he'd be in year 4.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be hoping that Draymond has his head on straight next season. And then I guess a bounce back Wiggins year, and then you're hoping that the role players exactly. And then I think you're also kind of, if he even starts, and then I think you're banking on after that the role players that you replaced Clay and Chris Paul with, maybe they're not as good of individual players, but they might just be, it might make your team a little bit more complete on both ends of the floor. But again, it's just like you don't have a realistic secondary option other than Kuminga. And it's just like, and it's not, has nothing to do with him, but it's just, if that's going to be like your secondary offensive guy, I don't really see how that really could remotely compare to the rest of the West.
If he turns out to be like a monster, like all-star, all right, cool. Now we can talk. But right now, no. I think, he's shown growth in the right direction, but there's nothing that he's shown to me so far that kind of shows that he's headed in that trajectory.
Yeah. That's the issue, is that like, and that's why, again, like obviously, what happened, happened. But, that's kind of the tough part of losing Clay is that, even though he wasn't the same guy, he was still a guy that could give you like, 18 a game, on decent, shooting. But now you lose that offensive option, and now you're kind of left with a bunch of other guys. And like, and last year, right? Like that kind of was what it was. Steph and a bunch of other guys, Kuminga came into his own eventually, but it just wasn't enough. And I don't see this really being, enough either.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and then just kind of, I guess, one last thing, right? Obviously, the other names that we mentioned, right, where it sounds like those guys aren't going anywhere, right? Like with Levine and Brandon Ingram. I know there was one rumor about Utah maybe being interested in Ingram, right? Where it's like, and I guess, and it sounded like and it's from a New Orleans source, but it sounded like Walker Kessler would need to be in that deal. But according to Shams Charania, it sounds like Ingram's going to start the season in New Orleans. And then it also, according to a lot of sources, sounds like Levine's going to be, in Chicago. So, with those two guys, I guess Chicago's in a different situation from New Orleans. But, like, what do you do with those guys in those situations? Because, obviously it's not even like they're bad players, but it just doesn't sound like there's any level of interest in teams, to trade for them. And like with Ingram, like, again, it's not that he stinks. But, obviously he's in a spot where he's got that expiring, deal looking for new money, $200 million. And how many teams really want to do that? I guess, first you can, if you want, mention the Utah Ingram thing if you want. And then, just kind of, I guess, kind of conclude it with, the Levine, Brandon Ingram stuff in terms of it sounds like those guys are just kind of stuck.
I mean, I don't buy the Utah one. Like, I understand it and I get it. I think it would be mutually beneficial for both sides. You do get, I think, quality players. Walker Kessler took a very bad step back this year. I will say that. But, I think with Brandon Ingram, pairing him with Lauri Markkanen would be pretty cool. But from my perspective, I feel like the Jazz would kind of want to not necessarily tank, but just try and be as bad as possible with or without Lauri Markkanen on the roster. And that was kind of my thought process. But, I do understand that. But, in regards to Levine and Brandon Ingram staying put pretty much. I think that makes sense. It's unfortunate, I think, a little bit because, when you're shopped like that and then nothing comes out of it, that's kind of rough. I feel like that can kind of take a hit on your confidence. But at the end of the day, I think it was way back, when the Pelicans got eliminated, the GM said, I've seen enough. So I feel like he's still going to be on the move. Probably deadline, if not before, if they can potentially work something out. But it seems like both these are just money issues. It comes down to the contracts. People don't really want to pay for that. And people definitely don't want to go band for band with it, if you know what I mean. Like, in terms of like, yeah, like I can't match this contract value. There's no way we can give something up of equal value and
Right.
feel, okay with this. So that's kind of the thing that I understand. And like Zach LaVine and Brandon Ingram, low key, this might be a hot take. I think they're both very good players, but they're just so hard to fit into a system. I feel like that's not centered around them, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like
and I
you look
think
at the
especially,
Pelicans, and like how he's paired with Zion and how they fared, kaput. Same thing with Brandon Ingram or not Brandon Ingram, sorry, Zach LaVine and the Bulls.
yeah.
When he was the guy, they were lit. But too many injuries, I think. Obviously, injuries across the board, and I think time has just kind of surpassed Zach LaVine. But with Brandon Ingram, I feel like he's got to be the main option on the team for it to quote unquote work.
Right. So, like, you would say that, like, if you were a team, you'd rather get Ingram, right? And I think that's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
not really a hot take or anything.
Of the two,
Yeah.
Brandon Ingram's better. I think he's the better player, better value. Can do a little bit more. I know they both are questionable on defense, but I think Brandon Ingram has higher upside just because what he can do with the ball at certain situations, mid-range assassin.
hmm Yeah, and that's the interesting part where it does feel like with New Orleans, and obviously we'll get to them when we talk about their offseason, but it feels like that what they did kind of was done with some type of Ingram deal in mind, and it hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not happen, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
for a while, right? Like even like the Jared Allen stuff, when we had heard so much about, them liking him, well, he signed an extension. Now, to be fair, he didn't sign his on August 6th. So, it's still very possible that he could get moved. It just
True.
wouldn't be until much later. And maybe
True.
that's what Cleveland's banking on. We don't know, but as of right now, I don't see anything out there, that would make sense for New Orleans to deal Ingram for. Because because like if you're New Orleans, like regardless of who's on the roster, you're trying to be good and win games. Like you're not trying to tank, you're not trying to be horrible. The Bulls are trying to be as bad as possible. And so for Chicago, right, I think probably at this point the best case scenario that you have to hope for is that you go into the season with a different roster, and there's going to be, whenever Levine comes back, he'll have the ball in his hands a little bit more because it's a different roster. I mean, like it may not be as much as it was, like say, you know, before they got guys like DeRozan and Vucevic, right? But it's just, like DeRozan's gone, so it's like Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Zach LaVine, and like he'll get his touches. And so I think the hope is that maybe he plays well, and then maybe if he continues to show that he's still really good, maybe some team will try to trade for him. But that contract is just very difficult.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, with Ingram, you know, the 40-50 million dollar a year thing, that's not there yet. It's right, it's close, but Levine's already on that huge deal. So, it's like that's where, things are kind of tough. Like, you look at Ingram's money, and he's making, 36 million this year, which is still a lot. I'm not trying to say that that's nothing. But then you look at LaVine and he's at 43 and then 46 next year and then a player option for 49. So, he still has basically, and he's probably going to pick that up, I'm sure. So, that's basically 3 more years of LaVine making a ton of money. Whereas Ingram's an expiring, presumably whoever, if they get him, would give him some type of extension or re-sign him in the offseason. But that's just really tough to sign up for, right? He's 29. He's had a bunch of injuries. And I just don't know, right? And that's the tough part. So, we'll see if he can kind of, play well and rehabilitate his value. Because I don't feel like Ingram necessarily has to rehabilitate his value. I just think the tough part is that I think with the new CBA, teams aren't just going to necessarily pay multiple guys $200+ million. Like even like with the Nuggets, right? Where, Jamal Murray still hasn't signed his extension. And that had been reported that they were negotiating and talking about it, but it still hasn't happened. It'll, probably happen at some point, but it's just a lot of teams may not necessarily be up for that, right? Like if you're New Orleans, do you want to pay both Zion and Brandon Ingram, like big max contracts? Like,
No,
I mean,
I'm not.
I
I'm
don't know
not
about
following
that.
the Clippers, bro. I'm not doing what the
Yeah,
Clippers
like,
did. Sorry.
are you basically going to pay both of those guys 40+ million a year?
Nope.
Like, I
Not
mean,
until
I
we
don't
get to
think
the
so.
second round, at least.
Right. And then and then like on top of that, McCollum, right, is like 30
Oh
million a
God.
year. DeJounte Murray, right, he'll be like 30 million or whatever a year. And then eventually you have to pay Trey Murphy, right? Herb Jones, I guess, has already been paid. So it's like something's gonna happen with that roster. I just don't necessarily know when. The Bulls is a little bit different because, they never want to, spend anyways. So I'd imagine if they have the opportunity to kind of gut some guys, they'll try to. But then they're also just really weird because, like, I mean, I don't know, and we'll get to the Bulls, later, but just some weird decisions this offseason. But I do wonder how the situation in New Orleans looks because, again, with the Bulls, there's no pressure because we know that team is going to suck. But with New
Yeah.
Orleans, a lot of people I think would expect them to be, at least as good as last year.
Yeah.
So, we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, apologies for not having the live stream after, the Serbia game, but we're gonna have one right after, the gold game, and hopefully Team USA wins gold, and we'll be able to talk about it. So, be ready for that. Obviously, again, congratulations for everybody helping us, get past 100 subs. Right, we're currently at 122, trying to get to possibly 500. Right, so that would be really helpful. For people who can do that, obviously always shout out to the people in the live streams who always, comment and, discuss things in there. So hopefully we'll, see you either in the next live stream or we'll see you in the next episode.